This is kind of going to be a fireside chat format between Owen and myself. We've known each other and worked together for a long time, so it's a practical session just to give you some tools you can use. But just before we start that, I'd just like to do an acknowledgement I forgot to do in my speech this morning and should have done, which is to acknowledge Marcel down here. Marcel, if you could just stand up. For those of you who are new, Marcel was chair of the Angel Association prior to myself, made a huge contribution, still actively involved, looking after government relations, which is tax and a whole bunch of other things, and a great contribution. And I'd also like to acknowledge his wife Deanna sitting beside him, and also my wife Penny down there, because we take on a lot of time and effort, and it's the support of our partners that makes it possible, so thank you. Okay, so I'm going to kick off with a couple of metrics, 3 things that I've found have been quite useful. Hopefully they'll be things you can use. And then Owen's going to kick off with some more after that, and then we'll have some questions and answers. So the problem I see usually with very early stage tech companies is what I'd kindly call lack of precision in forecasting revenue. It's not uncommon to see fine detail on the expenses and very high precision on the electricity consumption over the next 5 years, if only that were matched on the revenue side. So having been doing this for a while, I've found 2 tools that are effectively radar for revenue. So these are things that will tell you what revenue is going to be 3 to 6 months out. And in the early stages, when revenue is very volatile, I've found them quite useful. So I hope you might also. After that, I'll give you one that is more a business as usual sort of thing to tell you about sales effectiveness. And then Owen will focus more on sales effectiveness and also into marketing. So the 2 that I've found that are reliable indicators of future revenue are NPS and L4M. Do those terms mean anything to anybody? Yeah. Yep, okay. So we'll start with NPS, Net Promoter Score. Net Promoter Score is a measure of customer satisfaction. Just put your hand up if you know what NPS is, Net Promoter Score. Most of you, okay, great. So the idea there is that if you're a satisfied customer, you score 9 or 10. If you're passive, you're kind of 7 or 8. And if you're a detractor, you're down below that. And you net them out to get the Net Promoter Score. What I typically see in tech companies is a number, and I'll give you some ranges of numbers in a minute. But when I see the change in number, particularly a negative change, that's a leading indication for sales dropping off 3 to 6 months in advance. So for an average tech company, what I see in New Zealand is typically around 25, which is kind of like, okay, it's not great. A well-managed tech company, I typically see 50, 60, and very occasionally 70 as an NPS number. I've been on the board of a company where we had a NPS of 25 and our dealer channel had an NPS of 50. It's kind of embarrassing because like our dealers kind of preferred, our customers preferred to buy off our dealers than ourselves. The worst I've seen, or not first-hand seen but heard of, is minus 33, which is a health insurance company in New Zealand that was acquired by another health insurance company, and the CEO of the acquirer was lamenting the state the business was in. So typically, if you see something like 25, 25, 25, that's okay, it's normal. 25, 27, 28, 32, good sign. You know, things are going really well. 25, 23, 20, 21, 20, 19, 3 to 6 months out, you're going to see that flowing in decrease in revenue. So in terms of a dashboard to help you when you're looking at companies for their operational efficiency, I think NPS is a really good tool to have available to use. The other one I've found is L4M. And L4M is just last 4 months revenue. So it's simply extrapolating 12 months forward what the last 4 months revenue was as a percentage in terms of increase. Why 4 months? Well, 4 months is long enough to take out Christmas, holidays, a one-off sales event, something didn't happen. And the beauty of it is it's just a number, right? It has no opinion, it has no opinion embedded in it, it's just simply a number. What I'll typically see is a hockey stick for a sales forecast. So, you know, you've all seen what it looks like, it's a hockey stick. If you see an L4M number that's increasing and typically in a really strongly growing company like a SaaS company that's doing well, it's not uncommon to see like 22, 24, 26, 28, very strong growth. And that will typically lead to a hockey stick. What I worry about though is when I see a forecast revenue that's going up like the hockey stick and I see an L4M that looks like 20, 19, 18, 17, or even worse, 10, 11, 10, 9, 8. My experience has been that when I see a hockey stick forecast and an L4M that's like an ECG machine with the patient deceased, usually the L4M number is the more reliable indicator, right? So it's not a guarantee of what's happening, but it is certainly a basis for a discussion. And the key thing that has been valuable to me is that these are leading indicators of sales. It's all very well to look at it when the month's closed and you see what the number is. You don't have many options to be able to manage that when that's happened. But if you can see a trend starting to decay 3 to 6 months in advance, it gives you plenty of time to have a conversation and then plenty of time to work out how you're going to deal with it. The last one I just wanted to mention is not a radar, but it is, in terms of sales efficiency, quite useful. And for me, it's a sales close rate. And what I mean by that is it's the number of sales that you close out of the number that you try and close. And my funniest example ever, I met a founder recently who's looking for funding who'd made one sale. And I said, that's great. How many customers have you tried to sell? And he said, 127. What should I do? I said, stop trying to sell. Hire a sales guy straight away. So sales close rate, typically for startups and early stage tech companies, I see around 10%, somewhere between 5 and 10%. So they're having to do 10 pitches to get one sale, or 20. And that's kind of really tough. That kind of says you're in the early market, you're in the technology enthusiast or visionary market, and you're going to have real difficulty getting traction on that basis. Because you think of it from a practical point of view, 1 in 20 means every time someone says yes, you've got to face another 19 no's. So that's a lot of cost, it's a lot of negative energy, it's a lot of emotion, it's really, really painful. Companies that are running well, I see 1 in 3. Best in breed I ever see is 2 out of 3, 66%. I have seen companies go from 1 in 3 to 2 in 3 just simply by changing the process. So there's a lot of scope for improvement. So if you're looking at a company and trying to get an idea of how well the product resonates with the customers, what sort of traction they're getting in the market, have a look at the sales close rate and just ask the questions, get them to tell you the answer and then have a discussion with them about it. So after that, I'll hand over to Owen to do his Maori introduction and then add some more comments on sales and marketing, and then we'll circle back for questions.
Did you do a Maori introduction?
I did it first thing. I was number 1.
Okay.
I didn't do it very well.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Table Hill tuku moanga. Ko tuku mariro tuku awa. No ko te rana ahau. Ko Scott tuku whanau. Ko Owen tuku ingoawa. No ria. Tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. So, oh, you don't need to clap. I need to clap myself for that. What that actually means is originally for Scotland, from Scotland, my family, but we're 4th generation Kiwi, sheep farmers from South Otago. I didn't have the Maori word for sheep in there. Right, so just a little bit of an introduction to myself. You all know John, but I just need to give a little bit of context to the metrics that I'm going to talk about, because I'm really a sales and marketing guy. I don't really know about some of the other metrics that John's talking about there. So my company's called Concentrate, and the best way to think of us is we're like the outsourced marketing department for about 25 Kiwi tech companies. All we work with is tech companies. It's all I know and all I do. And so that's sort of the background for today. But more importantly, for the last 9 years, we've run a benchmark study around sales and marketing for Kiwi tech companies. So, we typically have about 300 to 350 Kiwi tech companies that just give us all their data around sales and marketing. How much they're spending, what they're spending it on, what's working, what's not working. And then in recent years, we've benchmarked that, compared it to USA companies, because most of the companies in New Zealand were actually operating in the USA, so we thought that would be a really good thing to do. And also we're starting to look at the patterns of the high growth companies compared to the rest of the pack. So that's sort of, and I suppose one of the real themes that's come out of that survey in the last 9 years is that New Zealand Kiwi companies we're really good at sales, but we're actually quite inefficient. And we could be more efficient in the way we do it, get more throughput through our sales machine. Because the way we operate is what we call a lone wolf. So we have really good salespeople. We buy them plane tickets and we send them off to trade shows and they just do a marvellous job and they get another deal and they bring it back home and we feed off it for a while. And they introduce themselves to the kids and everything, and then we send them off again. Great salespeople, but quite inefficient. So some of the metrics that I'm going to talk about now are really trying to, I suppose, keep an eye on that sales efficiency. And I think it's really key. So it's really hard, I think, for investors when they go into a company and all the obvious metrics, like revenue and sales and everything, you know, and everyone tells you that everything's going really well, but what are the metrics that if you just sort of come down a layer, you can tell whether the company's got a well-oiled sort of operation around their sales or not. So the most obvious metric, obviously, when you're talking about sales and marketing, is investment in sales and marketing. And Kiwi companies were found actually invest a truckload on sales and marketing in terms of salaries and non-marketing spend. So the average is about 30% of turnover. High growth companies, you know, go right up to 80% or whatever, you know, smaller companies. It obviously doesn't quite work as a percentage of turnover for small companies, but, and then, you know, the larger companies, they settle down at 20% of turnover. But really that doesn't tell us much. I mean, it just tells us, you know, we're spending money. And Kiwi companies actually benchmark really well to US companies on that core spend. So really the first metric that we really dig into is leads generated by marketing. So one of the problems we have is that one of the questions that we ask Kiwi tech companies is, what's your primary source of leads? And Kiwi companies, basically, you know, 36% of Kiwi companies said marketing. If I look at USA companies, 80% of similar USA companies get their leads, their primary source of leads is marketing. So in New Zealand, we have a sales department that tears all around the place and you know, they find leads, warm leads up, nurture leads and eventually close them, and we don't have marketing departments. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that your company has a marketing department that's responsible for generating leads. And we need to hold their feet to the fire and have that as their KPI. So as an example, one of the companies we work for, Spider Tracks, so they do GPS tracking of aeroplanes and helicopters and things that fly in the air. You know, we're the outsourced marketing department. Every month we have to deliver 120 qualified leads, marketing leads to that organisation. That's our KPI, nothing else. And their marketing manager, that's his KPI, and also he has a KPI around revenue. You know, so we're not talking about brands, logos, colours, trade shows, we're talking MQL. So that's the first one we should really have.
Marketing qualified leads, and just by way of disclosure, the Chief Marketing Officer of Spider Tracks is my son Todd.
Yes.
No pressure.
Yes, no pressure. And I think I suppose the second metric is really, you know, other parts of that pipeline. So it's really having, you know, if you think of a pipeline, if we're trying to generate leads through a website, we've got website visits, we've got leads, we've got qualified leads, you know, as we move down to sales. So it's trying to have a key metric at each stage of that process. But one of the sort of harder ones is really trying to understand that sales efficiency. And I think it's just a really hard thing to get a head around. But some of the ones that we've sort of dug into to try and understand that sales efficiency. So one area is the average experience required for a new sales hire. So in New Zealand, when we asked 300 odd companies, they said the average was 5 years because they want an experienced lone wolf that can hop on a plane and go and do deals. The average in the USA for similar companies, actually for SaaS companies, was 1.4 years because they've operationalised their sales, you know, into a system. And sort of in the same thing, you know, ramp up time, New Zealand, you know, 5 months. In the USA, you know, it's 2 or 3 months. And the final one was really around salaries. So we actually found that New Zealand companies the salespeople we employ in offshore markets, we paid about the same sort of overall on target earnings as USA companies, which was quite amazing really. But we have a far higher base component. So we have very low variable, and we pay, it was 83% higher base than the USA counterparts. So they've got this, we've got basically the experienced salesperson does everything, no marketing department. In the USA, they've got the younger, operationalised, system, and they have far more throughput. So I think it's really just trying to have some metrics in place to give you some visibility to the behaviour in the sales and marketing, rather than the obvious thing, which is revenue. What do we do now, John?
We have 25 minutes and 51 seconds for the questions.
We could tell some stories.
Maybe just one clarification. MQL, Marketing Qualified Lead, and SQL, Sales Qualified Lead. Slightly different.
John, you haven't asked Crimson to provide these metrics that you've just told us about.
You're just doing so well, I just don't need to. The Crimson Investor Relations I regard as the gold standard in terms of open communication. They're fantastic. And I mentioned that to Janine on the last one. Really, really good reporting, and really gives a very clear picture from an angel investor's point of view.
When you talk about sales close rates, I agree it's a really good metric to use. The first one you said 5 to 10% is from pitch to close. It's fairly sort of standard out there. What are some of those things that they're doing wrong in the process versus the other ones that are like a 1 in 3 or a 2 in 3?
So the big thing is lack of qualification and putting too much effort into prospects that have got no chance of being a customer. So one of the tools that's quite useful is to define an ICP, an ideal customer profile, and then score inquiries against the ideal to see what sort of fit there is. Another thing that wastes tremendous energy is chasing RFP, RFI type processes when the first visibility you have of it is receiving the document. Your chance of success is so far lower than 1% that it's just absolutely not worth even responding to it. In fact, it's negative. If you respond to it in that situation, you legitimise the process. So almost always those documents are written around one vendor's requirements, and you'll have been consulted as part of the process before the documents exist. If you don't have any visibility until they actually arrive, then it's a really low chance of success. So putting your effort where it'll generate most results. This is for B2B. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on B2C or any
No,
other
not
ones?
really. My experience is mainly B2B, but just sort of to add that if we just take a step back, when we talk about that lead to customer sort of close rate, we found that 38% of the companies we surveyed didn't know what that ratio was. So let's don't worry about flipping, how great the number should be. Do they know the number? That's the first metric.
I guess too, just one other point to add on to that. I did some sales training in the US a long time ago in California, and the metric that counts most for salespeople is, not surprisingly, demonstrate a track record of having done the same thing previously. So if you want somebody to sell, refrigerators to Eskimos, if they've been doing it successfully for the last 3 years, that's your best KPI. And as soon as you deviate away from that, your risk goes up. It's surprising how many people I see in early stage tech companies hire salespeople that don't have experience in the industry, or sometimes don't even have sales experience. The other thing that you can do to complement an ideal customer profile is to run a sales process. And for sales that are typically high value, we call them a complex sale, processes like Miller Hyman are really good for imposing discipline on the process. A buddy of mine in the US says salespeople don't do what you expect, salespeople do what you inspect. And so it gives you the tool to monitor compliance. Now, this is more a management thing than a board thing, but if you just satisfy yourself as an investor that it's being done and you get visibility of the data, it's a KPI for success.
I've got a question. I'd be interested in your insights into the land and expand type performance. I mean, at the extreme, there's the freemium type approach, create that entry point and then leverage that entry point. There's other, fairly common practice, to land with some sort of value proposition that you then start to build into the enterprise. And some have done it very well, whether you're Slack or Atlassian. That's been fundamental to their strategy. So I'd be interested in sort of the land expand type ratios that you're seeing.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have ratios on that, but I mean, I think if I understand the question right, that the thing is with New Zealand companies is New Zealand companies play in the niche, so the typical Kiwi, we had LanzaTech this morning, which is just on another planet. I just absolutely love that. That's a big scale. But, most Kiwi tech companies are all playing the niches. So, one of our great customers is PowerShield. I don't know if anyone's heard of PowerShield in Auckland. So they do the monitoring, in a data centre, a computer data centre, we have the UPSs that, if the power goes out, the UPS keeps it going. Behind the UPS is the batteries that keep that run the UPS, and their system monitors the batteries. So they're like in a niche. Great company. They're working in in countries all around the world. So it's sort of so New Zealand companies, that's sort of how they operate. So it is about dominating a niche and then expanding from there.
One comment I do see is most Kiwi companies tend to underprice what they sell. And, I know with Us Nicely we were encouraged when Mike Carden came on the board to put prices up every month, and that's what was done. And that's been a very successful strategy. You tend to undershoot. And so I also see in high value sales dramatically lower prices than what competitors are charging. And so it usually comes down to founder confidence. If you can kind of increase their confidence to increase their prices, you can have a much better outcome than if you stay where you are.
I can just add a little bit on pricing, is that we've dug into this a couple of years ago so we asked people 3 questions. The first one is your product better, worse, or similar to the competitors? And the majority said better product. And then we asked them, is your sort of service levels better, similar, or worse than the competitors? And the majority said better service. So better product, better service. And then we asked them about price. And the majority said and lower price. So it's just, once again, it's sort of our go-to place. And I think, we're sort of selling these amazing machines for lower prices. And my take on it, being a marketing person, a little bit of it is because we're sort of doing this lone wolf thing again. Because we send someone on a plane, they're knocking on the door, and all pumped up, I'm going to sell this for $1 million, and the person opens the door and they say, who are you? And you go, oh, well, shoes, how about I sell it for $50? You're immediately in the discount. We don't have, we're not creating demand. We don't have intensity in our programs that are, building brands. We just leave it to that salesperson, so there's a level of value on the table.
Nick and then Simon. John, you raised an interesting point with regards to RFIP. Governments are reasonably stable buyers, and, well, they are the largest venture capitalists in every country, except when you try to hire a CTO, that's not stable. But the point that I'm making is, do you have some numbers with regards to startups selling into government? Because usually government buyer, it's risk averse with regards to new companies. And it's something that this room can try to change, perhaps.
It's certainly true for high value sales, and particularly for those that go through RFPs. It's not generally down to product performance, it's generally down to balance sheet and number of employees, customer base, that sort of thing, and companies struggle. But quite often you can flick a sale from being a capital purchase through an RFP process to an operational process. And maybe just to illustrate that, last year, I don't know if you remember, those that were at Summit last year, the keynote was by Ian Taylor from Animation Research. Anybody here remember that presentation? And he demonstrated in there for one of the products he'd built, which was an air traffic control simulator for Airways in New Zealand. So I help Airways with their international business, and that they sell that as an air traffic control simulator. It's between $10 and $20 million. But they also run training facilities offshore, Puerto Rico, Saudi, and the Emirates, and they use it as a training device to train air traffic controllers. So they charge a student so much per year to go through and be trained. And so rather than take a $20 million capital sale, they clip the ticket on every controller that's trained. And so there are often tools you can use in pricing to move from one mode to another. And as you're smaller and you struggle against larger competitors. You have to be more creative in the ways you look at those. Simon, I think you had a question.
Yeah, Owen, Simon from Ice Angels. I'm just intrigued by the service you offer, where you're providing a marketing department. And I just wondered if you could talk about any experience you've had where you've been helping people get over like a kind of demand surge in a startup, or help them get to scale by plugging that in. It's quite an interesting thing to me.
Yeah, so yes, it's a bit of a journey. We a little bit about our service. So we do provide that outsourced marketing function, and then the core of it is around lead generation. So we're plugging in and trying to help the company scale, by just pouring those leads in on a regular basis, and obviously then we eventually over time work on quality as well. But I think the main thing there is a lot of we do struggle to engage with a lot of Kiwi tech companies. I think the first issue is always around control, is somehow instead of a multidiscipline team that we can plug in, that we've got everything from the last hire we just got is actually a computer programmer. She's from India, actually a rock star person who's a computer programmer. At the other end we've got designers, because that's the sort of the team we need to deliver these sort of lead generation plays. And our competitor is someone's hired someone for 50 grand or 60 grand graduate inside because they think, oh yeah, they'll do the marketing. So it's almost like our biggest sort of obstacle competitors trying to get these companies that sort of understand it. And so most of our engagement these days is with the sales manager and the sales teams, not the marketing departments, because the sales teams get it. They all want to be more efficient and they want more leads, and and they want to crank their sales. So we have some great conversations with them.
Hi, Owen, over here. I'm really impressed with the approach that you're taking with the tech sector, and I see, given our rankings and the OECD reports in terms of productivity, that this could actually be extrapolated out to a whole lot of other areas within the New Zealand economy. So, whether we in the startup, but not just in the tech sector, how would you see yourself being able to contribute some of the learnings that you've had in the tech sector to improve the productivity in some of these other sectors? Because I think you're onto something very strong here. We're saying we need to be generating more leads through marketing, and yet we're taking this maverick approach to the sales process. So what would your recommendation be there?
Gee, I was just trying to save the tech industry, let alone the rest of it. A part of our success, which was what we preach to our customers, is all about focus. So we're 100% focused on the tech industry, and that's the reason why I can have an agency in Christchurch, but most of our customers come out of Auckland, is because we're a specialty, niche. So that's my first sort of thing. So we're not going anywhere else. But having said that, what's actually is, I suppose, moving this into other segments is that we need technology to do this play. So back in the old days, marketing, it was actually a good time. It was all about lunches and billboard, put a billboard up and we're out for lunch, and and it was all, nothing was measurable, and it was just a great time. But now, everything we do, we use a technology to do it. So in marketing, we have a marketing automation technology. Everything we do is in that technology, and it's all on the internet. And then we put technology in to help the sales team be more productive. So still, it always still, even in the tech sector, before we talk about other sectors, it still sort of surprises me is that, it's like 16% of tech companies still don't have a CRM. It's like, flipping heck, you have a finance system and you have a CRM. It's just like, that's how you start a company. And 50% don't have marketing automation. But it's this marketing automation that's spreading this concept of lead gen into other segments. So all these other segments, so we use a product. There's about 6,500 marketing automation type technology, like all these explosion in a new segment. We use a product called HubSpot, and HubSpot is a USA company that's just a sales and marketing machine, and they are all over New Zealand and Australia, and so that's spreading this sort of methodology of generating leads online into all sorts of segments in New Zealand.
being so widely adopted in New Zealand, you can't get a HubSpot administrator at the moment. It's a nightmare. It's a really good tool.
Coming from Boston originally 3 years ago, but I live here in Blenheim or Marlborough. I was right. I saw the explosion of HubSpot, and I see the capacity that it has for a lot of people. And there's a very big step, I think, for a lot of New Zealand companies to kind of embrace the inbound marketing strategy and what that means, and that there's a huge level of learning that has to occur, and there's a cost, and people aren't willing to pay for that cost. But they, so do you feel like is that something that is quite prevalent with what you got? I mean, obviously you understand it, but do you feel like New Zealand businesses will adhere to and kind of like embrace the change that's going on with inbound marketing and how that can actually help, and why it's important to actually do it, not just talk about it?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that so all these sort of terms like inbound marketing, Kiwi companies, we are embracing inbound marketing, but as usual, we're sort of a bit boring about how we do it. So if we sort of get into the details, inbound marketing, all it's about is sort of, instead of necessarily in the old days we'd shout and advertise at people, what we're doing is sort of accepting that people were cruising around the internet trying to solve their problems and searching for stuff, so let's just be really helpful and try and engage with them with providing some great information. So the way Kiwi companies have done it is we just sort of do it a bit, how would I say it, like we do sort of one thing. USA companies will do 10 things, and they'll do them 10 times faster and 10 times sort of harder than, so we're a bit sort of, we sort of say we're doing it, but we're a bit wimpy about it. Just as an aside, so HubSpot, so if I just talk about something else for a second, so I've been involved in the software industry all my life, and working with companies that say, find a reseller overseas, and a typical, a lot of Kiwi companies, we sort of think that's the end of the road, I've signed a reseller, so job done. I've been on the other end from this USA company, HubSpot. So I'm a reseller. So we're New Zealand's largest reseller for them. But every 2 weeks, we have a call, like a Google Hangout, with either basically we have 2 types of support. One's sales support and one's business support. They are all over us in terms of if we hire salespeople, they'll train them in selling. They'll put the technology in. They want to know. They'll help us with pricing. They'll help us with resourcing. The ones in the USA, they help with funding. Kiwi companies still got a lot to learn about how to set up and run a reseller. They're just amazing.
Just to add another comment to that too, and also to circle back to Simon's question, one of the things I see is initially search engine optimization and then Google AdWords type strategies to build demand. But when it comes to scale, to Simon's point, as you try and increase that, you're throwing money at a zero-sum game, and the cost just goes astronomically through the roof and the performance goes down. So you have to change to more content-based marketing, where you're being a little bit more sophisticated and using a wider range of tools. And I see that as an area where companies typically struggle a lot with. So using outsourced providers like Owens, really good way of bridging that gap, and it really comes home to roost when you try and scale.
So with HubSpot, my understanding is that HubSpot is where you start, but when you scale and get quite large, it's no longer fit for purpose, and you move on to something like Salesforce. So is that correct, that HubSpot's sort of for smaller companies?
Well, they were in the USA. HubSpot's really targeted the USA SME market, which are quite large organisations. So you find in the New Zealand tech scene, the largest companies use Marketo. Like the Xeros, the Tate, Vend, they use Marketo. Marketo's like Salesforce, you need an IT team to run it, and HubSpot really will do every other tech company in New Zealand. It's just, it's scalable, it's big, it's just more of those. So we actually spend quite a bit of our time taking people off Salesforce, putting their data into HubSpot, and then with the fees that they were paying all their Salesforce users, they buy HubSpot, they buy CRMs, they buy a whole suite of stuff. It's so expensive. I think, Salesforce, it's just a beast. Large companies use it to impose management structure on their sales teams. It's a top-down product, and a lot of these other new products that come out are more of a salesperson productivity tool and scale up. It's quite cool.
Something that I've noticed both in Australia, and I'm interested in your opinion here from a New Zealand perspective, Australia and the US, where I'd say probably 95% of the pitches that we see, and male, female, so it's not just one, that they don't actually have anything around a sales and go-to-market strategy. So they may have figured out sort of their business model or working on it, but it's that how are they going to acquire customers, keep them retained, and that whole referral networks. Are you seeing that? But also then what advice are you giving to startups around how they're actually going to build out that go-to-market strategy? Because obviously it's critical around how you're going to get customers.
Yeah, most of what I see is technical founders rather than from a sales and marketing background. In terms of a technique, what I've been doing recently is talking through beyond the first capital round where it goes for the second and third, and painting out some of those scenarios about the sort of attraction they've got to get to justify valuation to move forward. And I found that's quite useful for people to think, I don't know a lot of stuff here, I need help. And that's kind of a good sign of them to go and try and round out the team with sales and marketing expertise.
Yeah, well, I think all engagements we do, we always have to start with either putting in place a marketing foundation or poking their marketing foundation and sort of getting a thing. And what I mean by that is just really answering those basic questions around, who's your customer, what's the problem you solve for them, and what's unique about the way you do it. And it's really the greater clarity you have around that, the easier execution. So, you can call it market strategy or whatever, but you've got to have that foundation before you do anything.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.